Snowfall blanketed the remote wilderness of Hollow Ridge in a silence so thick, it swallowed every trace of life. Trees bowed under the weight of ice. Wind carved eerie songs through the pines, and the sun had disappeared behind a canopy of storm clouds that painted everything in grays and shadows. Hollow Ridge wasn't just remote, it was sacred. Untamed. Dangerous. The storm had begun hours earlier, but the Forest Service's K-9 training unit continued their drills regardless. This wasn't just any squad. These dogs were bred and trained for the harshest terrains, and leading them was Shadow, a German shepherd unlike any other. His fur was a blend of charcoal and ash, like smoke from a dying fire. One long scar ran down his right shoulder, a memento from an encounter with a mountain cougar the year prior. He moved with silent precision, his massive form graceful even through thigh-deep snow. Beside him marched Eli Mercer, the grizzled veteran ranger who had called Hollow Ridge home for more than 2 decades. Eli didn't speak unless needed. His eyes were tired but sharp, the kind of gaze honed from years of watching the wilderness shift with invisible patterns. The other dogs trailed behind Shadow, weaving lines of paw prints through fresh powder. They trusted him, followed him without question, not because of training, but because of who Shadow was. They reached the final bend of their training loop when it happened. Shadow stopped. There was no sound. No motion. The rest of the squad halted immediately. Eli narrowed his eyes. "What is it, boy?" Shadow's ears twitched. His breath misted in heavy puffs as he turned his head slowly toward the deeper forest to the northwest, where the snow grew thicker and no patrols ventured during storms. For several seconds, no one moved. Then, without a command, Shadow stepped off the trail and into the wilderness. Eli's breath caught. "Shadow!" But the dog didn't stop. He pressed through the rising drifts, moving with urgency, not recklessness. The other dogs followed. Within seconds, they disappeared into the storm. Eli shouted and whistled. But even his voice seemed to vanish into the blizzard. He took one step forward, then another. The wind was so strong it nearly pushed him back. Still, he trudged ahead. A half-mile in, the snow became nearly blinding. Shadow led the pack in silence, nose low, ears alert. Something was calling him, not a sound, but a feeling, an instinct that clawed from the depths of his being. A life on the edge. A presence dissolving into the cold. Minutes passed like hours. Then Shadow stopped again. They had reached a small clearing, a dip in the land surrounded by tall trees. And there, barely visible beneath the snow, was a human figure, shackled to a tree. Eli stumbled into the clearing moments later, his breath freezing in his beard, eyes wide with disbelief. The man was unconscious, covered in ice, bloodied. His wrists were bound in rusted chains. Bruises bloomed across his face, and his forest ranger uniform hung in tatters. "Dear God!" Eli whispered, falling to his knees. Shadow moved closer, his muzzle brushing the frozen fingers of the man. A faint moan slipped through the man's cracked lips. Shadow's ears perked. He looked back at Eli and let out a single, sharp bark. A command. A declaration. A cry for help. The other dogs began digging. Eli fumbled for his radio, but it was dead, frozen. Panic surged through his veins. They had to act fast. Eli reached into his pack, pulled out thermal blankets, and began working to revive the man. Shadow pressed his body against him, trying to share warmth, his breath steady and fierce. The man's eyes fluttered open. He muttered a name, Dylan. Eli's jaw tightened. "That's Ranger Dylan Shaw. He's been missing for 3 weeks. They said he ran off. Quit the job." But this wasn't a man who had quit. This was a man who had been left for dead. As Eli worked, Shadow never moved. He stayed pressed to Dylan's side, eyes flicking across the tree-line, guarding, always guarding. In that storm, a decision was made. They weren't going back empty-handed. And they weren't going back the same. The truth had been buried. And now, Shadow would dig it up. The forest held its breath. In the aftermath of discovering Ranger Dylan Shaw near death, the world inside Hollow Ridge had shifted. It wasn't just the frost that chilled Eli Mercer now, it was the knowledge that something deeply wrong had taken root in the land he'd sworn to protect. As snow continued to fall in heavy silence, the manhunt began, not for an animal or a lost traveler, but for the truth. Shadow lay at Dylan's side throughout the night in the emergency ranger cabin. The fire flickered inside the stone hearth, casting amber glows over the sleeping ranger's frostbitten face. Eli sat nearby with a weathered thermos in his hand and a revolver on the table. The only sound in the room was the crackling fire and the occasional soft whine from Shadow as he nudged Dylan's limp hand. He hadn't moved much since they'd brought him in. Eli and the other rangers. Clara Winslow, a sharp-eyed veteran with unflinching resolve, and Nate Hollis, a younger deputy with something haunted behind his eyes, took shifts to monitor him. They weren't just worried about his health. They were worried about why this had happened at all. Why chain a ranger to a tree in the middle of a storm? Clara had asked the night before. Someone wanted him to die. Someone who knew the storm would do what bullets didn't. Nate had said nothing. Just stared at the chains they'd removed from Dylan's wrists, rusted but deliberate, purposefully cut to size. By morning, Dylan stirred. His voice was a rasp, his words half lost beneath the hoarseness of his dry throat. They know. They know about the South Ravine. Eli leaned in. Who, Dylan? What do they know? Dylan's eyes flicked to Shadow. The dog hadn't moved, but his ears twitched. They buried something down there, he whispered. Supplies, contraband. Something not meant to be found. I saw it just once. I took a photo, but then I was taken. Eli's blood ran cold. Do you still have it? The photo? I hid it, in the base, behind the radio panel, Dylan said. Then he passed out again. Shadow stood and walked to Eli, his gaze sharp and certain. No bark. No sound. Just a quiet readiness. Eli stood. Clara, stay here. Nate, with me. We're checking the base. But as they neared the ranger headquarters, something didn't sit right. The path to the south wing had fresh tracks, too fresh for the morning's conditions. Someone's been here, Eli said quietly. Shadow's hackles rose. They moved fast, silent. The snow muted their steps. Eli reached the base first, yanked the door open, and immediately drew his revolver. The place had been ransacked. Desks overturned. File drawers pulled out and burned in the fireplace. The scent of gasoline lingered faintly in the air. Damn it, Nate whispered. They're trying to erase everything. Shadow darted inside ahead of them, his nose low. Within seconds, he scratched at the back panel of the old wall-mounted radio. Eli rushed to it. With Nate watching the door, Eli pried it loose. Behind it, a flash drive and a folded photograph. The photo was grainy but clear enough, crates marked in military stencil, sealed and buried beneath blue tarps in a clearing near the South Ravine. Shadow let out a low, throaty growl. Behind them, the outer door slammed. Eli and Nate turned, guns raised. But it was Clara. She was out of breath. 2 snowmobiles left the east gate. Unmarked. Fast. Eli grabbed the flash drive and the photo. Then they know we know. They returned to the cabin to find Dylan slipping back into consciousness. Eli crouched by him. That place you saw. We're going there. Dylan nodded weakly. Don't go alone. Shadow stood at the door, tail stiff, body alert. His message was clear. They were not alone anymore. That night, Eli slept with one eye open. Not because he feared the snowstorm, he'd lived through dozens. But because for the first time, he feared the forest had been compromised, tainted by human corruption. He awoke to the sound of claws tapping wood. Shadow stood at the window, watching the tree line. The snow had stopped. The sky was bruised blue. And there, just beyond the clearing, were boot prints. Fresh.
The enemy wasn't just hiding now. They were hunting.
The woods were deathly still. Not the kind of silence that came with snowfall, but something else.
Something watching. Something waiting.
Eli Mercer didn't speak as he guided the snowmobile down the icy trail toward the south ravine, Shadow running beside him with unyielding focus.
Clara and Nate followed closely behind on a second vehicle.
The forest stretched out like a frozen graveyard, endless and unblinking. They were heading straight toward the place Dylan Shaw had nearly died for.
A cache of secrets buried deep beneath snow and lies. The photo from Dylan's hidden stash had haunted Eli all night. Military crates, the markings half erased, buried in a clearing that no patrol maps ever showed.
The same spot he had been told not to patrol 5 winters ago due to unstable ground.
Back then, it hadn't seemed odd. But now? Everything was suspect.
Shadow abruptly stopped, ears perked.
Eli eased the snowmobile to a halt.
The German shepherd's body stiffened, nose raised, breath slow and controlled.
"What is it, boy?" Eli asked quietly, rising to his feet and unholstering his sidearm.
Then he heard it too, a faint crunch of snow far ahead, where the trees thickened. Not the soft padding of wildlife, but heavy-booted footsteps, trying and failing to move quietly.
Clara caught up.
"They're here already." Nate unslung his rifle and knelt behind a snow-covered log.
"Do we move in?" "No," Eli said. "We let Shadow lead." The dog didn't hesitate.
Like a phantom in the snow, Shadow darted through the underbrush, following the scent. Eli moved after him, heart pounding, each step deeper into uncertainty. Within minutes, they reached the clearing. It was as Dylan had described, flat, wide, with a strange, unnatural dip in the center. Tarps, now half buried under fresh snow, covered the ground like shrouds. And emerging from beneath them, metal crates.
Sealed. Stamped. But that wasn't what made Eli's blood run cold. It was the footprints. Dozens of them. Recent. Leading to the crates, then away, toward the ridge.
"They emptied some of it," Clara said, brushing snow off a crate lid.
"But not all." Eli crouched and pried it open. Inside, wildlife pelts. Dozens. Tagged and numbered, despite hunting being illegal in the reserve.
Beneath them were medical kits, restricted narcotics, smuggled goods. "This isn't just poaching," Clara muttered.
"This is a black market operation. And it's been going on for years," Eli added. "Right under our noses." Shadow let out a soft growl. They turned.
From the shadows behind the trees, a man emerged, rifle raised, face obscured by a black scarf. But Eli knew that walk, even before he stepped into full view. It was Deputy Coulson. He had vanished 6 months ago after a family emergency. Everyone thought he'd moved out of state. Instead, he had been helping run the operation from the inside. "Put the gun down, Coulson," Eli said calmly.
Coulson laughed. "You think you're still in control, Mercer? Bitter Ridge belongs to us now."
But before Coulson could finish, Shadow lunged.
He moved like lightning, silent and precise.
The rifle cracked as Coulson fired blindly, but the bullet flew wide. Shadow crashed into him, teeth locking on his forearm, driving the man into the snow. Eli rushed forward and wrestled the weapon away, pressing the barrel to Coulson's back as Clara secured the cuffs.
Shadow didn't let go until Eli gave the command.
When he did, the dog stepped back, standing tall over the writhing man like a sentry of judgment.
"What now?"
Nate asked, glancing around the clearing.
"You think he's the last?"
"No," Eli said grimly. "He's just the scout. The real minds behind this, whoever let Dylan rot out here, whoever gave those orders. They're still in the shadows."
Eli looked down at Shadow. "Let's go find them."
But before they could leave, Shadow stopped again, staring at a tree just beyond the clearing.
Eli followed his gaze.
Etched into the bark, barely visible, was a symbol, 3 concentric circles, crossed out with a red slash.
He didn't recognize it. But Shadow did. The dog let out the faintest whine. Eli moved closer. At the base of the tree, buried beneath the snow, they found something wrapped in cloth. A patch. An old sheriff's department insignia. Burnt. Slashed. And behind it, a USB drive. Clara looked at Eli. "We need to see what's on that." Eli pocketed the drive. They had uncovered the bodies, the goods, the lies. Now, they had found a name. Whoever had started this, had once worn the same badge as them. And Shadow, who had never forgotten a scent, was ready to track it to the bitter end. The journey back from the ravine was suffocating, not because of the snow, but because of the weight of the revelation. Back at Hollow Ridge Station, Eli plugged the USB drive into the encrypted laptop they used for incident reports. As the screen blinked to life, everyone leaned in. Clara, Nate, and even Logan Hayes, a quiet rookie ranger who'd insisted on joining after hearing what happened to Dylan. Shadow sat beside Eli, silent but watchful, his amber eyes fixed on the screen like he understood the gravity of the moment. What they saw left no room for denial. Recordings. Images. Financial records. Names. Dozens of them. Half were civilian contractors. The rest? Sheriff's Department staff. Forest management officers. Former rangers. And in the final folder, 2 sets of personnel files redacted by hand. But Shadow stiffened as soon as one of the photos loaded. It was Sheriff Roy Harlan. Eli's former mentor. Retired 6 years ago due to illness. The same year Hollow Ridge boundaries had changed, patrol routes had been shortened, and funding started mysteriously drying up. But what broke Eli's heart more was the other face. Captain Mason Levitt. Eli's closest friend. Thought to have died in an avalanche 5 years ago. Clara swore under her breath. They faked it. All of it. Why would they go to such lengths? Nate asked, stunned. Because Bitter Creek was never just a reserve, Eli muttered. It was a goldmine for anyone who could keep the government's eyes away. The USB held documents showing wildlife trafficking networks, land leases sold in offshore accounts, and covert military supply drops misfiled as emergency provisions. It was bigger than poaching. It was organized corruption. Decades deep. And it had almost killed Dylan Shaw for uncovering it. Shadow suddenly stood, growling low toward the hallway. A moment later, the station lights flickered. Then died. The room plunged into darkness. Eli reached instinctively for his weapon. Clara whispered, "Back generator should have kicked in." Nate was already on the radio. "Command? Come in? This is Hollow Ridge Station, we've lost power, static." Then a sound from outside. Engines. Snowmobiles. Multiple. Shadow ran to the window and barked, deep, guttural, protective. "Get the evidence," Eli ordered. "They're coming for the drive." The team scrambled. Clara took the laptop. Nate went to guard the rear exit. Eli stayed by the door with Shadow. Logan grabbed the emergency flares. Before they could react further, the door exploded inward, splintering wood and snow blasted into the room. 4 men in black snow gear surged inside. But Shadow was faster. He launched forward, teeth bared, smashing into the first intruder before the man could raise his weapon. Eli followed, wrestling the second man to the ground, punches cracking like gunshots in the close quarters. Clara slammed one with a fire extinguisher. Nate fired a warning shot into the air loud enough to force the other 2 attackers to hesitate. Then it happened. Shadow yelped. A sharp, desperate cry. Eli turned just in time to see one of the intruders stab a hunting knife into the German shepherd's flank before fleeing through the broken window. "No!" Eli shouted, diving to Shadow's side. The other men retreated fast, disappearing into the woods, leaving behind blood in the snow and chaos inside. Eli dropped to his knees, cradling Shadow's body. The dog whimpered, his breathing fast and shallow. Blood soaked through his thick coat, staining Eli's arms. "Get the med kit!" Eli screamed. Clara rushed to retrieve it, but Shadow's eyes were wide, focused only on Eli. Not on the pain. Not on the wound. Only on the man he had chosen. "You're okay, boy. Stay with me." "You're okay," Eli whispered, stroking his ears, voice trembling. Shadow tried to move, but his legs gave out. He collapsed fully into Eli's lap. For the second time that winter, the forest itself seemed to freeze. But this time, it wasn't with fear. It was with rage. They tried to silence Dylan. They tried to bury the truth. Now they had heard Shadow. And in Eli's eyes burned a fury colder than any blizzard. Later that night, after Dr. Karina Rhodes stitched Shadow's wound in the emergency field tent, she approached Eli with red-rimmed eyes. "He'll survive," she said. "But he'll limp. That leg's damaged. He'll never run like he used to." Eli said nothing. Just sat beside the unconscious dog, holding his paw. Clara placed the drive in Eli's hand. "We deliver this in person. No transmissions. No emails. We go straight to the district attorney." Nate nodded. "What about Harlan and Levitt?" "We smoke them out." Eli's voice was cold, resolute. "No more shadows. We bring them into the light." Shadow stirred faintly, pressing his head into Eli's knee. And just like that, despite the wound, despite the limp, despite the fire that nearly consumed everything, the warrior was still here. Still watching. Still waiting. Still ready. And the war for Bitter Creek's soul had only just begun. The snowstorm that swallowed Bitter Creek that night was different from any before. It didn't shriek or howl like a wolf's warning. It whispered low, steady, relentless, like a secret too long buried clawing its way back into the world. Inside the ranger station's backup command tent, Eli sat cross-legged on the cold ground beside Shadow. The dog was wrapped in thermal blankets, his bandaged leg propped carefully, his breathing shallow but steady. Outside, Clara and Nate worked around the clock, communicating with nearby precincts and trying to confirm which members of the sheriff's office could be trusted. Logan, quiet and pale, stood guard by the entrance, eyes scanning the dark tree line beyond. No one spoke of what they feared, that the enemy already knew where they were. Eli laid a hand gently on Shadow's head. "You still with me?" A soft flick of the tail. It was enough. "Good boy," Eli whispered, feeling the tears press behind his eyes. He hadn't cried when they shot at him. He hadn't cried when they blew apart the door. But the moment Shadow fell bleeding into the snow, he broke. He had faced war, corruption, loss, but nothing ever brought him to his knees like the thought of losing this dog. This friend. Just then, Clara rushed in with a satellite phone. "It's Director Morales," she said breathlessly. "FBI." Eli stood and took it. "Yes?" A firm voice came through, muffled by static. "Ranger Eli Carter. We received encrypted files. The Bureau's moving. But you need to evacuate. Right now. We've just intercepted communications. Rogue units are converging on your location. Their orders aren't just to silence. They want to erase." Eli's eyes flicked to Shadow. He knew. "They'll have to go through me first," he muttered. "No heroics," Morales said. "Get out. You're the key witness. That USB, those files, your testimony. They'll break this thing open. But not if you're dead." The line went dead. Eli handed the phone back. "Clara," he said, "get the evidence packed. Nate, prep the snowmobiles. Logan, load supplies." "What about Shadow?" Logan asked, his voice trembling. Eli looked at the dog. "We take him. I don't leave him behind." The wind outside howled like a wounded animal as they rode through the frozen darkness, headlights barely piercing the blizzard. Shadow lay curled inside the sled behind Eli's snowmobile, wrapped in emergency blankets. Eli kept glancing back, each turn of his head a prayer. Every second felt like a countdown. And then it came. A roar from behind. Headlights. 4. No, 5 snowmobiles. Closing fast. They're on us. Clara shouted over the radio. Split. Eli ordered. Lead them away from the sled. I'll take Shadow through the North Fork Trail. But that's avalanche territory. Nate protested. I don't care. They won't risk it. He veered left. Alone now, he pushed the throttle, cutting through the snowdrifts like a knife. Trees blurred. His vision tunneled. Behind him, Shadow let out a low whine. I know, buddy, Eli said. Just hold on. The forest grew darker, the trail narrower. Snow hung heavy in the branches above. A sound like thunder rolled across the mountain. Avalanche. No. Not yet. Eli swerved hard, barely missing a fallen branch. But too late. Ahead, figures. 3 men. Armed. Waiting. A trap. Eli dove from the snowmobile, rolling into the snow, weapon drawn. Bullets tore through the trees. Shadow barked furiously from the sled. One attacker advanced. Eli fired, hit him in the leg. The second raised his rifle, but Shadow. Even injured, even half-frozen, he launched from the sled, teeth bared, into the attacker's chest. The rifle clattered away as the man screamed. Eli took down the third with a clean shot. Then silence. Only the wind remained. Eli crawled toward Shadow. Blood streaked his bandages, his side heaving. Shadow, no, stay with me, but the dog pressed his head into Eli's chest. Even in agony, he hadn't hesitated. He had saved him. Again. Snow began to fall harder, thicker, blinding. Eli knew what it meant. The avalanche was coming. He grabbed Shadow, pulled him close, and whispered, "We don't die here. Not you. Not me." He slung the dog across his shoulders, every step a scream of pain through his spine, and trudged forward, step after step, carrying his friend toward the faint glow of a ranger outpost light, just barely visible through the blur. They stumbled in together as the mountain roared behind them. Collapsed in a heap. Alive. Barely. But alive. Shadow survived the night. So did Eli. But something inside them both had changed. The kind of bond forged not just by love, but by sacrifice. A loyalty tested by blood and snow. By choices made in the face of death. They weren't just ranger and dog anymore. They were something more. Something unbreakable. And they both knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Not until every shadow had been brought into the light. The ranger outpost was barely more than a reinforced cabin with a generator and a few cots, but that night, it became a fortress of hope. Eli sat on the wooden floor beside the old iron stove, the fire crackling just enough to break the silence that wrapped around them like another layer of snow. He had washed the dried blood from Shadow's fur and changed the bandages. The dog lay still, curled beside him, his breathing slow but steady. "I told you we'd make it," Eli whispered, brushing the fur behind Shadow's ears. Outside, the storm still raged. But something else stirred beneath the howling wind, something colder than the snow. Bitter Creek hadn't just been infected by corruption. It had been claimed. And now, the darkness was coming to reclaim what Eli had uncovered. By morning, the sky over Bitter Creek had changed. Not in color. But in weight. The air felt heavier. The silence was deeper. Even the birds were absent. Eli watched from the cabin's narrow window as Logan rode up on a snowmobile, his parka rimmed with frost. "They found Nate," Logan said as he entered, shaking off snow. "In Sector 9. Shot in the leg, tied to a tree. Said they wanted him to deliver a message." Eli's jaw tightened. "Which was?" "They know you're alive. And they know you have the files."
He turned toward the table where Eli had stacked the documents retrieved from the bunker. Cracked leather folders, old maps, a flash drive with data backups. It was everything. And it was enough. "We need to broadcast it," Clara said. She had arrived moments later, her eyes bloodshot, her breath fogging the air. "This can't wait. If we hold it too long, they'll take it back. They'll burn us all down." Eli nodded. They contacted Director Morales via encrypted satellite. The data was uploaded to multiple secure servers. It was no longer a secret. It was a fuse. And now, someone had lit the match. That night, as Shadow slept fitfully, Eli sat beside him reading the field reports, trying to piece together a pattern, something he could use. And that's when he found it. A forgotten path. One that ran through the hollow pines, an area marked unstable years ago, declared off-limits due to rock slides and sinkholes. But it wasn't closed for nature. It was closed for secrecy. A second bunker. Logan and Clara leaned over his shoulder. "It's a second drop point," Eli said. "Another hub. If there's more evidence, real names, bank records, it'll be there." "You can't go alone," Logan said. Eli looked down at Shadow, still dozing, a faint tremor in his legs. "No," Eli said. "But I won't bring him either. Not this time." He stood, grabbed his gear, and made for the door. But before he could step out, a low whine made him stop. "Shadow." The dog was standing. Wobbly. But standing. Their eyes met. "I can't ask you to do this," Eli said, voice cracking. But Shadow walked forward. One slow, deliberate step at a time. And sat at Eli's side. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. Eli nodded, swallowing hard. "Then we finish this together." The journey to the hollow pines was like moving through a graveyard. Snow-covered trees, long black shadows, an air that didn't just feel cold, it felt cursed. They moved silently, Logan flanking left, Clara right, Eli and Shadow in the center. As they neared the ridge, Eli slowed. Shadow had stopped, his ears twitching. Then came the sound. A whistle. Not wind. A signal. They were waiting. "They knew we'd come," Clara whispered. "Let's make them wish we hadn't," Eli replied, raising his rifle. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Bullets tore through the trees. They ducked behind a snow-laden boulder. Clara returned fire, Logan radioed for backup, but Eli waited. Watched. He had seen this strategy before. They were hurting them. He looked at Shadow, who growled low, nose pointed right away from the fight. "What is it, boy?" Eli whispered. The German shepherd darted through the brush. "Shadow." But then Eli heard it too. A metallic clink. A hidden generator. Beneath the snow. He followed the dog and found it. A trap door. Barely visible under the weight of snow and pine needles. Eli opened it and descended into the dark, narrow tunnel beneath the earth. Inside, the truth waited. Stacked hard drives. Photo evidence. Names, dates, blackmail files, secret payoffs, all mapped out like a web. And at the center, Sheriff Dalton's original confession. A video. Unreleased. Buried. He copied the files to a drive, heart pounding. But just then, a voice from behind. I wondered who'd sniff this place out. Eli turned. Mark Howie. The real traitor. Gun in hand. Shadow stepped between them, teeth bared. But he was still weak. Eli raised his hands. You kill me, this goes public anyway. The files are backed up. It's over. Mark sneered. Maybe. But some things are worth the risk. He raised the gun, but didn't see Clara behind him. Her boot cracked his arm sideways. The gun skittered. Shadow lunged. And this time,
There was no hesitation. Mark Howie was done.
When they emerged from the bunker, the dawn was bleeding through the trees.
Not bright. But enough. Enough to show the snow-drenched faces of agents swarming the forest, led by Director Morales herself.
"You did it," she said.
Eli didn't speak.
He just knelt down and wrapped his arms around Shadow.
"You did it."
The wind had calmed, but the silence it left behind was heavy, like the hush after a storm that wasn't finished, only resting. Back at the station, Eli walked beside Shadow slowly, their boots and paws leaving paired impressions in the snow. The agents had taken over the operation, cataloging everything uncovered from the second bunker.
Arrests were being made. Statements taken.
The local news was already spinning headlines. But for Eli, none of that mattered, not yet. Because Valor had paid the price.
And now, Shadow bore the scars.
They reached the edge of the ranger compound, where the forest met the barracks.
Snowflakes hung in the frozen morning air like whispers suspended mid-sentence.
Eli sat on a bench near the fire pit, patting the wood beside him. Shadow jumped up beside him with a low grunt.
"You're stubborn," Eli said, his voice soft.
The dog leaned against him slightly.
"I'm grateful for that."
A radio crackled from his belt. Logan's voice buzzed through.
They found Howie's second location.
Maps, cache, unmarked weapons.
It's bigger than we thought. The feds are asking for your statement. Eli looked down at the dog resting beside him. "Tell them I'll be in later."
He turned off the radio.
For now, this moment was theirs.
Days passed, the snow began to melt, and Bitter Creek revealed its scars. But beneath the bruises, something had started to grow.
A seed of reckoning. And perhaps, if the forest willed it. Renewal.
Rachel was reinstated as lead field ranger, and Morales made it official. Eli would head a new unit, the Sentinel Wing, designed to embed rangers and canines across every sector of Bitter Creek.
No more blind spots. No more secrets. And at the heart of it, would be Eli and Shadow.
On the day of the ceremony, the entire town turned up. Veterans, children, forest workers, and families. People who once viewed rangers as mere silhouettes behind snow-draped fences now stood with signs that read "Thank you, Shadow and Protectors of Bitter Creek." A new badge was unveiled.
Sentinel Unit 01. It bore the outline of a German shepherd against a mountain sunrise.
When they pinned it to Eli's uniform, he didn't say a word. He simply knelt, took the badge from his chest, and clipped it to Shadow's collar instead.
The crowd cheered. But Eli's eyes glistened. Because he remembered the boy in the snow.
He remembered the broken man under chains. He remembered the dog who had defied every order, every command, to follow what was right. That night, under the stars that blinked like distant fires above the ridge, Eli and Shadow stood watch one last time on their own terms.
Just a man and his dog. Not as legends. Not as heroes. But as the final line drawn between darkness and light. And when the first owl called from the trees and the forest shifted softly under the moon, Eli whispered, "Whatever comes, we stand." Shadow wagged his tail. Their vow was clear. Together, they would protect Bitter Creek, not just the land, but the truth written in every stone, every snowfall, and every heart that still believed in loyalty. Not just for today. Not just until the next storm. But until the end of all things.